Shadows breathe through Glamis. The castle rose out of the mist like the silhouette of a monstrous thing, too large, too heavy to belong to the earth, yet rooted in its soil as if the ground itself had grown up to birth it. Glamis stood before me with its towers stretching like crooked fingers into the grayness, walls darkened with centuries of rain and smoke, windows like unblinking eyes. Even before I stepped inside, I felt a weight pressing over me, the kind of heaviness that steals the rhythm from your lungs, that convinces you the air has been replaced with something stale, recycled through countless unseen mouths. The gravel under my boots crunched loudly, though the fog swallowed most sound. Even that small crunch felt like an intrusion, like the castle itself resented my presence, unwilling to acknowledge me yet all too aware of each movement I made. A cold drift of wind brushed past, carrying with it the smell of damp stone, iron, and something faintly bitter, something like scorched wood or the remnants of a long-burned candle. Inside, the silence seemed alive. Each corridor was narrow yet endless, the ceilings low in places, forcing my eyes to dart upward where shadows crawled along the beams. I remember the texture of the air. It clung to my skin like a damp cloth, seeping into the folds of my jacket, sinking its chill into my bones. The torches fixed along the walls gave off little warmth. Their flames shivered instead of swayed, as though the darkness wasn't a mere absence of light, but a presence that resisted illumination. My footsteps echoed along the flagstone floors, but not evenly. Sometimes the sound returned to me, as if the walls were pushing it back, too close, too immediate. Other times, the echo stretched on longer than it should, as if the sound continued down corridors that didn't exist, a whisper traveling paths carved for no one living. The stories I'd read before coming here spoke of shadows that did not belong to those who cast them, of a chamber sealed to hide the unnameable, of figures glimpsed in stairwells when one is certain they walked alone. They described the sense of being observed not with eyes, but with breath, an exhale down the back of your neck when the hall behind you is empty. That was how it began for me. The first breath came in the Queen's room, where the drapes were drawn so tightly that daylight couldn't intrude. The fabric smelled of dust and old perfume, faint traces of lavender stretched thin by centuries. I felt the weight of the room before I noticed anything out of place, the way my ears began to ring, the way my chest tightened as though I'd climbed too many stairs. Then the whisper of air traced the nape of my neck, subtle yet distinct, like someone leaning close enough to let their presence touch me without sound. I spun quickly, but only the drapes swayed, brushing against the wall as if stirred by something other than the still air. The more I moved through the castle, the more I noticed how its silence wasn't empty at all. It was textured, alive, breathing. Behind every closed door I passed, I imagined a slow, steady inhalation, as though the rooms themselves were lungs drawing in the cold air of the Scottish night. Some doors seemed to exhale faint drafts, carrying with them the smell of rot or soot. At times, I thought I heard sighs leaking from the stone itself. When I reached the hidden stairwell, I knew I had come to the place most avoided in the castle's stories. It was narrow, the steps uneven, worn down by countless feet that no longer had form. My boots made shallow taps that seemed swallowed the moment they left me. The walls pressed close, the stones cold enough to sting the skin of my knuckles when I brushed against them. As I descended, the air thickened, dense with the earthy bitterness of moisture trapped where no light reached. The shadows here did not merely rest against the wall, they pulsed. My eyes adjusted, and I realized I was not watching stillness at all but movement. The darkness recoiled slightly when I lowered my candle near the wall, only to stretch again once I lifted it away, like something inhaling, testing the edge of the flame. I paused on one of the middle steps, unsure if the sound I heard was the crackle of my candle or a hushed intake of breath coming from behind me. I did not turn. Turning seemed dangerous, like acknowledging something that thrived only when recognized. Instead, I forced my feet to move downward, though my legs trembled against the stone. The stairwell opened into a small chamber, circular, its ceiling vaulted with ribs of stone that seemed almost like skeletal fingers clutching inward. It was colder here, unnaturally so. My candle's flame guttered, bending low as if forced by an unseen exhale. My skin tightened with gooseflesh, and the back of my throat filled with the copper tang of fear, metallic and sharp. At the center of the chamber lay a faint depression, as though the floor itself had been worn into shape by something pressed there for centuries. The dust did not lie evenly here, it circled outward, disturbed by patterns no human foot had made. I knelt closer, the candlelight trembling in my hand, and felt a shift of air pass across my face, deliberate, almost intimate. Not a draft, not something natural. That was when I realized the shadows weren't bound to the walls. They had depth. They had volume. They swelled and contracted, mimicking breath. Each inhalation was slow and labored, as though drawn from lungs that had collapsed long ago, yet refused to still. When I listened closely, I swore I could hear the rasp of it, the soft, ragged scrape of something pulling existence into itself. I cannot tell how long I stood there, frozen in the center of that chamber. Minutes stretched like hours. My ears strained to separate sound from silence, but they had merged into one thing, a living absence, the dark itself making its presence known. And then came the sharp certainty that the breathing no longer belonged solely to the walls or the shadows, it matched mine. It adjusted to me. Each time I exhaled, I felt another exhale answer, almost in rhythm but slightly delayed, as though the castle itself were learning me, studying how best to imitate life. I backed away, step by careful step, until my shoulders brushed the edges of the stairwell again. I kept my candle before me like a talisman, though the flame burned so low I knew it could not outlast the suffocating darkness much longer. The shadows receded only slightly, never enough to reveal the chamber fully, and never enough to convince me they had given up their pursuit. By the time I climbed back to the upper halls, my chest was raw from shallow breaths. The air above felt almost warm in comparison, though it still carried that scent of soot and age. Yet the awareness lingered. Every corridor pulsed faintly. Every corner seemed to shudder when I passed. The entire structure felt less like stone and more like a body, an organism built of towers, corridors, and chambers, breathing me in with each step I took. Even when I finally left, crossing the mist-laden courtyard, I felt the rhythm still pressing against my lungs. The castle's inhalation followed me outward, a phantom weight that clung long after the towers had dissolved into fog behind me. And though the air beyond the grounds was cleaner, freer, I could not shake the certainty that my own breathing no longer belonged to me alone. It had been synchronized to something older, darker, and endlessly patient. The shadows of Glamis had learned the shape of my breath, and they were not finished. House that screams at Maple Hill. The climb up Maple Hill was never easy. The road bent unnaturally, twisting through patches of withered trees that leaned toward one another like broken figures conferring in silence. The branches had long since lost their leaves, and what little life remained clung only in the form of fungus, pale and damp, clotted to the bark in the shapes of mouths half open. The air carried no bird song, no trace of motion except the occasional scuttle of something unseen across the dead underbrush. At the crest of the hill, the house waited. It did not stand so much as loom. Its roof sloped inward as though the structure had begun to collapse upon itself, but decided to remain upright, locked forever in the posture of a scream frozen mid-breath. The windows were too large for their frames, like eyes stretched wide, glass clouded with grime that dulled the reflection of the sky. Its siding curled outward, strips of wood peeling as though the house was shedding its own skin. Every inch of it whispered of abandonment, but never of peace. It was not a house surrendered to time. It was a house resisting it. The story said it had screamed once, loud enough that the town below woke in the night, the sound rolling down the hill like thunder breaking from a throat. No one agreed on what shape the scream had taken. Some said it was the howl of a woman. Others swore it was the bellow of something animal and inhuman. Still, everyone agreed on one thing. The sound had not come from human lungs. It had come from the house itself. I went inside. The first breath of air was enough to convince me that nothing natural lingered within those walls. The air was stagnant, thick with the layered odors of rot and mildew, yet beneath it all was something sharper, acidic, like the faint tang of iron left too long in rain. I pressed forward, each step sinking into the warped boards of the floor, the groan of the wood strangely delayed, as though the house only acknowledged the weight of my body a moment too late. Dust motes drifted like ash in the thin shafts of gray light cutting through cracks in the boards. The silence was not total. There was always sound, but faint, something stretching, something contracting, as if the house flexed muscles long and used. The walls seemed to breathe. The wallpaper bulged slightly, then fell flat again, as though the plaster beneath it exhaled when I passed. The stairs creaked beneath my touch before I even set my weight on them, anticipating me, calling out in small, sharp voices. Each step up was answered by another sound elsewhere in the house, sometimes a faint shudder through the floorboards, sometimes the hollow thump of something shifting inside the walls. The rooms were husks, stripped of furniture save for the fragments no one had wanted to carry away. A rusted bed frame tilted in one corner of the upstairs bedroom, springs groaning faintly as though responding to invisible pressure. In another room, the fragments of a broken mirror lay scattered across the floor, but the pieces reflected light strangely, as though shadows moved through them independent of my own. The deeper I went into the house, the stronger the sensation became that I was intruding into something alive. Every wall held a faint vibration, subtle but undeniable. When I pressed my palm against the faded wallpaper, I felt the slow thrum of it, irregular but powerful, like the heartbeat of something too vast to see in full. I withdrew my hand quickly, yet the warmth of the pulse remained, traveling up my arm, settling uneasily against my chest. And then came the first sound. It was faint at first, a breath caught in wood, escaping in a low sigh. It seeped through the corridor and clung to me, shaping itself into a tone that was not quite human. The longer I stood still, the more it deepened, building into something resonant, until it pressed into my bones like the distant toll of a bell. The scream was not sudden, not sharp, but slow in its birth. It began as a moan leaking from the walls, then layered upon itself. Floorboards rattled. Window panes shook in their sockets. The house gathered its strength, every creak and groan swelling until the sound became unbearable. It filled my chest as though my own ribs were trembling in time with the structure. I stumbled back, ears ringing, vision shaking with the vibration. The house screamed. It was not one voice but thousands, all pouring from the gaps in the walls, from the spaces between the boards, from the narrow cracks in the ceiling. It roared like grief made physical, like pain given form. The windows bulged outward, glass quivering as though about to burst, and every shadow in the corners of the room seemed to reach toward me, arms pulled by the current of sound. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it made no difference. The scream was not heard, it was felt. It coursed through me, rattling my teeth, burning the lining of my throat though I had made no sound of my own. The air reeked of dust and rot, choked with the copper tang of something old and unburied. My eyes watered, not from pain but from the sheer force of the noise pressing tears out of me. And then, just as suddenly, silence fell. It was an unnatural silence, heavier than the scream itself. My body trembled, desperate for the sound to continue, if only to prove that I had not imagined it. The house seemed to wait, listening, measuring me. In the stillness, I realized I had been breathing in rhythm with the sound, my lungs dragged into its cadence. Now I gasped like a fish, unable to reclaim my own breath. The walls shifted then, not visibly, not enough to prove it had happened, but enough that the room no longer felt the same shape. The ceiling lowered by some fraction, the shadows stretched wider, the doorframe narrowed. I was not trapped in the house was closing around me. I ran. The hallway bent at angles it had not before. Doorways opened where blank walls had been, each spilling darkness thick enough to swallow sight. My feet slammed against boards that no longer echoed in any natural way. The sound of my own movement came back jagged, distorted, 1,000 tiny screams hidden inside each step. When I burst into the front room, the scream came again, louder, stronger, shaking the foundation. The windows did not just rattle. They fractured, spiderwebs of cracks spreading outward, though none of them shattered fully. The walls swelled inward, and the floor buckled beneath me. The sound pushed me forward, drove me toward the door as though forcing me out. I stumbled into the night, collapsing onto the damp grass of the hill. Behind me, the house trembled visibly, its timbers warping as though inhaling once more. The scream built again but did not release. It hovered on the edge, trapped in its throat. I waited for the cry to burst forth, for the sound to tear the night in two, but it never came. Instead, the house stood still, silent, watching. And in that silence, I realized the truth. The house did not scream to drive people away. It screamed to mark them, to pull them into its rhythm, to make their lungs part of its chorus. The scream had not left me. It lingered beneath my skin, faint but growing, each breath of mine trembling with the echo of that unholy sound. The house at Maple Hill had given me its voice. And someday when it decides, I will scream for it. Black Veil Over Villisca. The town of Villisca is small enough that you can cross it in a matter of minutes, but it carries a weight that feels far larger than its boundaries. The houses line the quiet streets with the stillness of a painting, but there is one structure among them that breaks the calm, not with noise but with an absence, an emptiness that hangs in the air like a veil of ash. The Moore house, the one that has never truly exhaled since the night it was filled with death. I remember the way the sky looked when I approached it, low and swollen with clouds, the color of bruises spreading across skin. The street was empty, no voices, no footsteps, no sound of cars rolling across gravel. Even the wind seemed to pause when I stood before the house, as if it, too, did not wish to cross its threshold. The house itself is plain at first glance, a two-story farmhouse with white siding dulled into a tired gray. Yet nothing about it feels simple. The windows face outward like eyes refusing to close, their panes darkened from within, catching the dim light only enough to suggest depth without revealing what lingers. The porch sagged slightly under the weight of time, boards bent as though bowed in grief. Crossing that porch felt like walking onto a stage where I was not the actor, but the offering. Each step rang hollow, the wood moaning beneath me in long, low tones. The air thickened even before I touched the doorknob, carrying a scent both faint and unforgettable. Iron, the metallic tang of blood, softened by years yet not erased. It clung to the air the way a bruise clings beneath skin, hidden but present. Inside, the silence greeted me like a host. It was not the still silence of an abandoned place, but one that had been cultivated, preserved. The walls drank sound. Even the rhythm of my breath felt wrong here, shallow and uneven, as though I were borrowing air not meant for me. The rooms were bare, but each carried a presence. In the parlor, the light was dull and reluctant, filtering through curtains that had grown stiff with dust. I could almost taste the dryness in the air, bitter as old wood. The floor creaked with each step, but not in protest, more like recognition, as if it remembered the weight of bodies once moving across it. Upstairs, the air was heavier. It pressed down like unseen hands, carrying with it a mixture of rot and something sweeter, cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The bedrooms were small, the ceilings low, walls closing in with their quiet judgment. I ran my hand across the wallpaper and felt it crumble, flaking beneath my fingertips like skin shedding from a wound. It was in one of those bedrooms that I first noticed it, the veil. Not visible to the eye, not in any form I could point to, but a thickness, an invisible drape that separated me from the world I had known outside. The air shifted in texture, as though I had walked through a membrane into something preserved, embalmed. My ears filled with a dull ringing, and for a moment, I thought I heard movement, tiny, deliberate, the shuffle of bare feet across floorboards. The house carries its memory like an open wound. You do not need to be told what happened here. The walls bleeded into you. In that upstairs hallway, I felt the echo of it. The suddenness of violence, the heaviness of bodies stilled, the lingering terror of breaths that never finished. It was not an image in my mind, but a sensation in my body, as if my own heart had briefly beat in the rhythm of another's final moments. The deeper I stayed, the more the veil closed around me. My skin prickled, not from cold but from contact, as though the air itself pressed too close. Shadows stretched strangely across the walls, moving with the dim light in ways that did not follow the angles of my candle. They bent inward, converging, shapes gathering in silence to watch. And then came the sound. It was faint at first, the scrape of something metallic against wood. It carried through the floorboards, subtle but sharp, resonant enough to thread itself through my spine. I froze, listening, heart knocking hard against my ribs. The sound came again, slower this time, a dragging whisper across the grain of wood, patient and deliberate. I followed it downward, though every instinct urged me to leave. The staircase groaned as I descended, and halfway down, I felt it, a weightless brush against my arm, cold as the inside of a grave. It left no mark but sank into my nerves, a warning etched into skin deeper than sight. The kitchen was darker than it should have been. The windows let in only a thin slice of gray, muted as though filtered through smoke. The scent of iron was stronger here, mingled with the faint musk of old ash. The sound repeated, closer now, though there was nothing to see, no object to explain it, no hand to produce it. That was when the veil lowered completely. The air shifted, heavier still, and with it came the undeniable sense of presence. Not one, not even two, but many. The room felt crowded, though it remained empty to my eyes. I could almost feel the press of shoulders against me, the warmth of bodies too close, yet there was no warmth, only a chill that spread across my chest like water freezing over. The silence fractured, not with a scream, not with a cry, but with the faintest sound of weeping. It bled from the corners of the room, muffled, strained, as if caught beneath the floorboards. It was not the loud grief of mourning, but the stifled sob of someone who knows help will not come. The sound threaded itself into me, pulling at my own lungs until I realized I was breathing unevenly, my chest hitching in rhythm with it. The shadows swayed then, pulling inward toward the center of the room, their edges rippling like fabric in water. They converged into a shape without definition, a blackness thicker than the rest, a veil that hung suspended as though draped over an invisible figure. It swelled slightly, breathing, and when it exhaled, the room dropped into a silence deeper than death. I do not know how long I stood there, but time did not belong to me in that house. The veil held me, suffocated me, demanded I become part of its silence. I felt my heart slow, my limbs grow heavy, my thoughts scatter into fragments not my own. And then, without warning, it receded. The shadows loosened, the weight lifted, and the house exhaled. The veil did not vanish, it shifted. It pulled back just enough to let me move, though the sense of watching never left. I staggered out of the kitchen, through the parlor, onto the porch, and down into the damp grass, gasping as though I had been underwater. When I looked back, the windows stared out as they always had, unblinking dark. The house had given nothing away, yet I knew the veil had not stayed behind. It clung to me, thin as smoke, invisible but heavy. My breath still carried its rhythm, my skin still tingled with its chill. Villisca does not forget. It drapes its sorrow over all who enter, marking them, reminding them. The house does not scream, it does not shout, it veils. It covers you in its mourning, pulling you beneath its black shroud until your own shadow no longer feels like it belongs to you. And even now, far from Maple Street, I feel it. The weight, the stillness, the veil. It has not lifted,